Every game, every point spread, every total. It's NFL week number 15, and this is the Picks and Predictions live stream here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. I'll talk about every game. We'll go through all the comments as we go through. Good to have so many folks back in the channel. If you're joining after the fact, in the timeline down below, you'll be able to jump ahead to any game that you want to hear a little bit more about. It is a full card, and it is a busy card, to say the least. And so I'll try to keep everything into the usual hour that we keep this condensed into. It's going to be a stretch. Some games I have a lot to say, some games a little less as well. But it is good to start off a Wednesday morning with everybody here in the live chat. And I encourage you guys to keep the questions coming in as we go throughout the show. Before we get into it, I want to say good morning to J.O. Favorite time of the week. I enjoy this time of the week as well. It's good to be with you guys. Today's going to be a good show. I got a good feeling about it. So I'm feeling good as well. Good morning to Rich. Another very busy Wednesday. Every Wednesday during the football season, Rich, you know, is very busy. Nino says, good morning. Coinbit 26 calling out the grammar police. Look, that was a fair comment, I think. There's a couple things, the accent, where I'm from, the pronunciation, it's never going to be a fit for everybody. So I said in the comments, I appreciate the call outs because it means folks are listening. If nobody was listening, there would be no grammar to correct. And so when I get those comments, it just means, hey, be a little bit better in the pronunciation, which I'll certainly try to do so. I said something wild in the podcast this morning. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was called out in the comments too, so that was funny. David Rosansky, one of the few times we're on the Bills this year. Here we go. We've got the Super Bowl wager as well, which you must be happy about too, at 6-1 from Sunday. Riley Carroll back for another show. Good morning. Brady, top YouTube commenter for the month, back in the chat as well. H-Train34. Gerard Morris finally made the start of a live podcast. You're too busy enjoying the sun down in Florida while the rest of us in the Pacific Northwest suffer through the snow and the cold and the wind and everything else that is going on. Sean, Devin Barth, Ryan Roberts, Adam Orphan back for another show as well. Hopefully you're going to have a great week 15 as well. Let's get into it. It was a morning sweating. The interest rate drops up here in Canada as the wife and I are going through our first home build and home purchase. And so we've been trying to time it right. I think we've got it and we're locking in now. So this morning had the news on for the first time in a couple of years, seeing we got the 0.5%. Everything's good. It's been tanking down. So everything's starting off on the right note this Wednesday morning, and hopefully it will continue through. Mario says he loves the Miller pick. That was a good one last week as well. And Michael B in for another show. So it has been a busy Wednesday morning. It's about to get a whole lot busier. Before we jump into the games, want to just go high level for a second. You guys have heard me talking about it. If you followed the live streams last year, you heard me talking about it. Adam Levitan, who everybody knows and loves over at Established to Run, always tweets great stuff. Occasionally, he will throw out pass rate over expectation tweets, and I just want to highlight two of them to illustrate what I'm trying to say on these live streams about when we get to this time in the year, we start to see things really open up, especially with teams that are on the brink and on the edge, sort of fighting for their playoff lives. And these charts really represent it well. So this was the league-wide pass rate over expectation at the end of week 10. And for those of you listening on the podcast, that's all 32 teams on a graph. And then you'll see on the left-hand side in the green, teams that are above average for pass rate over expectation. And then on the right side, you see teams in gray who are below average. And this represents play calling more so than just pass run splits. It's how willing teams are to throw the football. After week 10, the significance here is that there are 5 teams who are in the green with the LA Rams right on the fringe. And so this was just 4 weeks ago. Now look at the chart after this past Sunday. As you can see on the video, way more teams in green. In total, 12 teams now in the green. And so this simply says teams are starting to throw the football more because these games are taking on more importance, more significance, and teams are just not going down running the football. Last year, in this time of the year is when I really started picking off a lot of those overs. And you guys remember it from the live streams and the pods, all of these ugly overs in these big elimination games, de facto elimination games, how you want to label it. You're just seeing some of these teams act and profile a lot differently. What I think is significant about this chart is look at the right side of the chart right now and look at all of these teams that are in the playoff picture or right on the bubble that are at extremes on this chart. Philadelphia, Indianapolis, Atlanta, the bottom 3 in pass rate over expectation. The Packers are number 4. The Ravens are number 5. The 49ers are number 6. And I'm saying Those are the 6th lowest teams in pass rate over expectation. The Steelers are in there. The Rams are in there. And so there are a lot of teams here that are deep in the playoff picture, playing for their playoff hopes, and they are near the bottom of the league and have really been relying on the run game. I think that changes the next 4 weeks. And I think it's something everybody needs to keep in mind as you look at this going forward, saying like we might see teams and their play calling really change down the stretch. It certainly did last year. And we saw a lot of those teams that were right on the edge last year in the gray really increase their pass rate over expectation the last couple of weeks, playing for their playoff lives. Something to keep in mind as we're getting to that time of the year. Everything tightens up. That's what we start to look at. So I wanted to bring that up for everybody as you're looking at that. If you are looking for the raw data for PROE, NFELO has a great chart and table. You can filter by teams and time frames as well over on their website. So if you want the raw data to follow along, that's where you can find a lot of those and you can look at those. So just keep that in mind as we go down the stretch. I think that is important. Gerard says, let's see the coffee. Out of Nespresso pods, so I settled for $8.02. I didn't even add anything. The gouging. I mean, it's great coffee. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's hard to say no, but 8.02. It's too much. It's too much. I wish that there was, and one of my favorite parts about going to the States is like the Dutch Bros, or they have the espresso shacks on the side of like highways and then cities on stops on like the interstates. I love those things. We don't have any of those up here. Someone's got to have the insight and the vision to launch that product here in Canada so you can just drive through, get it, and you're good to go. Man, $8 is excessive. It just keeps going up, and nobody seems to question it. I keep buying it. That's maybe why nobody's questioning it. Man, keep in mind that's Canadian, so US is like 6 when you do that. So that's what it is. Mike Durso says the interest rate sweat is greater than the NFL sweat, especially when you got the bank calling you to tell you to come in and lock it in, and you know it's dropping and you're trying to wait them out. There's nothing easy about getting your house, especially when it is your first one. Mike D says Blue Bottle is my new favorite. Man, you guys have it good in the States for coffee, that's for sure. Let's get to the games. LA Rams on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. Niners 2.5-point favorites, minus 120 total. 49.5. As I said at the start, some of these games, longer explanation, handful of them shorter, 16 games, nobody on a bye. That's the stretch down the season. So I'll focus a little bit more on the games I think matter a little bit more, and we'll move through some of them quickly so everybody can get out of here in under 2 hours. Both of these teams played their best game of the season on Sunday. I think what happened with San Francisco prior to the Bears game stands out more in this matchup than what we saw from the LA Rams. George Kittle had a press conference on Monday where he was talking about prior to the Bears game, there was a closed-door meeting with all of the players where effectively everybody was called out on both sides of the football to play with desperation, to buy back in, to show more effort. They're playing for the season. Not to say that the Rams are not, but the big question with the 49ers, when we think last week market-wise, from 6 down to 3, nobody wanting to touch them, was that this is a dead team. I never quite subscribed to that because it was an all-in spot, and it turned out to be that this team reset and bought back in. And I think that really matters when we think about this number that has been adjusted down slightly. I think the Niners are going to take money, and we see this number push back out as the week goes on. But to me, the 49ers price point is kind of off, to put it lightly, if we're getting this effort and this renewed buy-in from the team, which I think is very real and stands out. Where I think the Rams are overvalued in this game is what they did against the Buffalo Bills was a complete outlier. When you think about production and performance from Matthew Stafford, it was a top 10 game the last 25 years in the NFL, up there with some of the most elite Drew Brees and Tom Brady performances. Looking back at the film and what the Rams were doing, I mean, some of those plays and completions were hard to believe, even on replay, that they happened. The Bills' coverage was great. It was just an all-time great game from Matthew Stafford, which to me is keeping this number down. I get the competition last week for the Rams was much more difficult than what the 49ers faced. To me, in this matchup, this with the Niners at home, and under a field goal still, don't think that's going to last much longer, is a side that I have to bet into. A couple other things that stood out for me for the Rams. I think back 2 weeks ago, everyone was healthy. Everybody was on the field, and they couldn't move the football in the first half against the New Orleans Saints. And that was the Saints defense that has struggled all year stopping the run. And the Rams couldn't get anything going. And they're so hit and miss on a weekly basis. And last week against Buffalo, they showed some things they hadn't done much of the entire season. The biggest one was they really started to operate from empty sets on offense. Part of that is because they had the O-line that was intended to play together in week one together for just the third game all season. So there's probably a heightened trust in being able to play with those guys and have Stafford kept clean in the pocket. And we saw that really work, but it's put out there. It's put on film. Teams around the league are aware of it now. They obviously knew that that was a potential of something that could happen. But replicating that performance again on a short week, turning it around very quickly, I think is tough. This is also the first game that Kupp and Nakua have played together in their career against the 49ers. So that's another possible little negative against the 49ers. But to me, this is a San Francisco team. Off of those pressers, it just reads to me like a much different team in a spot with the season on the line at home again. I think they match up well. I do think that this is a game where the Niners win and cover at home on Thursday Night Football. Washington on the road at the New Orleans Saints. Commanders 7 minus 120. Total in this game is 43. So there was pro money this morning on Washington that took out a lot of the sevens. When I say 7 minus 20, that's a price that you're not going to see a ton of on the screen, but is still there at all of these sports books on the 7 with the shorter total. So something to keep in mind as you're looking at this. The only reason I don't have Washington starred is just because of some of the availability people in the live stream might have not to get the minus 20. So that's why this is how it is. If you're looking at 7.5 for Washington and you're still playing teasers, I think the Commanders are a great teaser leg. A show of call-outs as I bringing up a couple of graphics here. I have another one that I think is interesting to think about in this game, and this one comes from Sam Hoppen specifically, who does the composite ratings every week. I really enjoy looking at his work and following it every single week, and he does a great graphic in his thread every week under the ratings, which compile multiple sources. And I want to pull this up, and I'll hide the banner for a second for everybody on the video. And so what this shows is the weekly composite rating of all of the teams. And the Eagles and Bucks are in there just for screenshot simplicity. We have to hire a graphics guy at some point as this show gets over 10,000 viewers on a weekly basis. Maybe we'll get there. For now, you got me with screenshots on Apple. As you can see in the middle of the Saints graphic, week 7, week 8, they were rated about 5 points worse than an average football team on a neutral field. And that, again, was taking all the ratings and putting them together. And so that stretch of games was without Derek Carr, was without Chris Olave, was without Raheed Shaheed, was without Taysom Hill for a couple of games, had O-line injuries, tons of injuries. The Saints are in that same spot now this week. And I can't feel like that is fully being accounted for in this price, because at that point, even when the Saints were 5 points worse than an average team on a neutral from the composite ratings, we were still seeing teams dominate them. I mean, I think about that Broncos game where nobody was very high on the Denver Broncos. They go into New Orleans and just walk up and down the field. Sure, there was extra motivation and buy-in, and it was a short week for a younger QB staff that was starting. So I get that plays in, but New Orleans was not competitive in those games. And now not only is Dennis Allen no longer with the team, but you have all the same injuries. You have a far worse head coach. You have a defense that still cannot stop the run. And they're hosting a Washington team this week that is coming out of the bye, but pre-bye to me showed that they fixed that ground game. They couldn't get anything going on the ground for a couple of weeks. Robinson was banged up. Daniels was banged up. They just weren't quite crisp. And then they faced a Titans team with a very good run defense, and they hang 257 yards on the ground on them. So now it's a bye to sort of reset things with a young quarterback, to let him get a little bit healthier, to let Robinson get a little bit healthier. There's a chance that Lattimore will return to face his old team, which will bolster the secondary. If this is the Saints returning to that form, which I think is possibly fair to say, it's a question of, was 5 low enough? Should it be less than 5? I think so. And then to bring this banner up one more time, I look at the Washington Commanders. This was a hard team to price because you look week 1, 2, 3, 4, how low they were. And it's obviously a steep trajectory where they were improved quite a bit and bumped up in the ratings. Right now, the Commanders are priced in composite ratings, which I'm expecting out later today, to be about 1.5 points better than an average team on a neutral, which might not quite reflect the ceiling that they can get to. So if there's a little bit higher Washington can go, the Saints are maybe worse than the market is thinking that they are. And there's a pretty positive matchup, plus the bump from the bye. This to me seems like a pretty advantageous spot for the Commanders to continue what they showed against Tennessee and keep the ball moving on the ground. So again, pro money took out the 7s. You can see 720 a little bit at a few books. Keep that in mind. It's a game that I'll have more updates on. This is also a game that's been going back and forth here for the first couple of days. There was early Washington money when it opened. 7.5s got taken back for the Saints. It was another buy on New Orleans this morning that pushed this back up, but certainly think they show well on the ground in this game. Miami on the road at the Houston Texans. Houston 2.5 minus 20, total 47. Second pick of the show for me, Houston minus 2.5 at home. I'll bring up 2 more banners. It's a good show with graphics, really going in depth. You guys remember the playoffs last year when I had the full like cue cards and everything? We'll try to get back to that a little bit as we wind down the season. Here are the Miami Dolphins on that same chart. I'll hide the banner again for everybody watching. Obviously, the dip is with Tua, but we see the Dolphins rated just slightly better than an average football team in the NFL. Here are the Houston Texans. They've been above average the entire season in their composite rating, but you can see the Texans nearly at the lowest point that they have been rated all season. Miami, on the other hand, near the highest point that they have been rated all season and trending upwards. So we have 2 teams kind of in different spots and different trajectories from the ratings. And I start to think about the situation of both of these teams coming into this game. So let's think about Miami for a second. They just narrowly got by the New York Jets in overtime. They scored on the final 2 possessions of the game. They got out with a win, survived, kept the season alive. That was following up a very underwhelming performance on the road at the Green Bay Packers. The week prior, they got the Pats. The week before that, they got the Raiders. The week before that, they got the Rams. That was the trajectory upward that we are seeing with Tua returning. The offense for Miami is playing fantastic football. Tua looks amazing. The offense is certainly trending in the right direction. But like I start to think about this a little bit. They played the Jets without their best cornerback, Sauce Gardner, on the field, and a defense that was shuffling things around and fell way behind and needed a late comeback to survive. They played the Green Bay Packers without their best cornerback, Jair Alexander, who did not play. The offense looked good, but it certainly started slow and was not competitive by the end of the game. They couldn't come back. They played a Pats team that had defensive injuries, but were able to get a lead early and just kind of sit on that for the rest of the game, running the football. They played a Raiders team, which is an average defense as is. They were able to get a lead and sit on that. So it's been very comfortable for them the last couple of weeks in all of these games where the offense has started to stack numbers. So I do think that that is making them a little bit falsely inflated, because I look at this defense for Miami and I still see major issues for them getting stops and getting off the field when they're playing decent and competent offenses. Now for Houston, I think some viewers might look at the Texans and say, hey, this is a offense that has really been struggling all season. But there's a subjective angle here that I just can't ignore, and I think it gives the Houston Texans a much higher ceiling in this matchup. Houston is coming out of the bye, which may not sound like much, but in the press conference, we saw DeMeco Ryans, the head coach, last week talk about how important the bye was. He talked about how the Texans were exhausted, the team was effectively out of gas, and what the problem was Houston was the first team to start training camp back in July. They had the Hall of Fame game August 1st, so they had to be ready and prepared for that. So Houston not only started first, but they had the last bye in the season. So it's effectively been 19 weeks of practice and prep every single day for Houston, dating back to July. I mean, we have seen this offense not only go through a number of injuries during the course of the season, but some real highs and lows in performance. And there's almost been like a doubt in the market for this Texans team being overrated relative to what they were a year ago. But this, to me, is a game where they show very well on both sides of the football, because everything that is being labeled as the next 3 weeks for Houston, to me, just reads like it is a full reset on the season. DeMeco Ryans and the staff is calling the next 3 games, which they'll play in the next 10 days, the gauntlet. They have a game this Sunday, then they play on the short week, and then they play on Christmas Day. And it's Chiefs, Ravens, Dolphins. So 3 huge games with the playoffs on the line. Everybody was encouraged to get rest. Everybody was encouraged to take time off. And now the team is back prepping for this week. I just really like any time a team is in this scenario and you're hearing these things from the coaches. And in this game, you're getting it against a Dolphins team that is coming off a very undeserving win. And I look at these ratings and how stagnant they are, and the Dolphins trending up a little, the Texans trending down. I like this for Houston at home quite a bit. So this is a game where I'm playing the Texans at 2.5 minus 20. Let me catch up with a couple of comments here in the chat. Connor is saying, already can't wait to bet Mike Macdonald, first coach fired next year. Strong take there from Connor. Brady saying, Adam, how did the Dolphins win when they refused to tackle? Their defensive players run in the opposite direction of the ball carrier. Opposite direction. It's a bit of an overstatement, but okay. Take the Texans and sleep like a baby. Well, if you're telling me that the latter part of that is true and I can sleep soundly, I'll take your word for it. I'll sign for that right now, Brady. You make a good point. The Dolphins missed 20 tackles against the Packers. To me, that was a reflection of the environment, the cold. I think that played into it, but also the Packers in their ground game is very effective and very strong. You certainly saw some missed tackles against the Jets too. And so I do have concerns about the Dolphins defense. If the Texans want to utilize Mixon, I think there's an advantage. If this becomes a bit of a Nico Collins game, I think there's an advantage there too. So I hear what you're saying, Brady. I'll buy into it. I'm with it. I see what you mean. Bobby is saying Rams appear to have their O-line back. Teams appear to be fitter, and they're going to run all over San Francisco. It is certainly possible with that O-line. They should have run all over the Saints and didn't. Man, they're a hard team to gauge on a weekly basis. So that is what I'm looking at. Bobby says, really surprised you like San Francisco. I am a San Francisco fan. Okay, a little bit of bias. And we beat the Bears, who are not great, but before that got whacked by the Bills, got whacked by the Packers, and lost to a Seahawks team at home. Not good. Seahawks game was effectively the defense needing a stop down the wire. So that was a bit of a pass there. Bills game, tough environment, outdoors in the snow. Packers game was outdoors in the rain as well. So some weather elements working against San Francisco in those games that give you a bit of a break in that, I would say. And I get you can't look more dominant than the Bears. 315 yards to -2 near halftime. So be a fan this week, Bobby. Be a fan. Next game up, New York Jets -3.5 with a total of 40 on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. This is one of the games, not a whole lot to say, not a whole lot to talk about. I'm surprised that the Jets have not been bet this week by somebody. They have been bet every week. And if anything this week, the Jags are taking a bit of money. I don't think there was much impressive to take away from the Mac Jones performance against the Tennessee Titans, where the Jags certainly should have lost that game. Tennessee a bit undeserving with the red zone turnovers and the mistakes. I'm surprised to see the Jets have not been bet, even at this price. I know there's some outrage that I've seen in the commentary from the podcast where it's like, how can the Jets be laying more in the field goal on the road to anybody? This is Mac Jones and the Jags. There has not been a lot that has looked impressive in any way all season. And so the Jets will likely be without Breece Hall again, I would expect. So there's some injury concerns, but I tell you, Isaiah Davis looked good in spot role and out of the backfield. And there are still obviously weapons on the Jets side against a very man-heavy Jags team. For me, their number total, nothing for me on this side. So this is A big card, and we'll keep moving on. Cincinnati on the road at the Tennessee Titans. Bengals laying 5 points with a total of 46.5. Bengals are a tough team to gauge and handicap this week. I don't know where you want to rank the bad beat for Bengals Cowboys and how that end game finished. I've seen the case made that it was the worst beat of the season. I think it's top 3 or 4. It still reflects that the Bengals had no business how that end game finished against the Cowboys, getting out of Dallas with a win, with the punt block, with the recovery, with the touchdown. So there is certainly some noise in that. The Tennessee Titans could not have looked worse against the Jacksonville Jags. And this is a game of many on the card this week that I have trouble with, because what can you trust from either team? And I don't know what the answer is. And that's true for a lot of home teams this week that are getting a lot of points, that don't have a lot to play for, and you have Tennessee firmly in that role. I don't know what you're getting from the Tennessee Titans. Now, Burrow called out offensive and defensive players in his presser last week. Did that effort really show on the field against the Cowboys? I would argue no, outside of Chase in that game. And so to an extent, you can get that level of effort carrying you through on a weekly basis against teams that are not buying in and not caring. But what is the level of motivation for the Tennessee Titans? Well, the big thing here is you have Callahan going up against his old team. And so you have a head coaching revenge game in a way, as he is going up against his old team and his old staff. Is that going to be enough to get a Titans team that no-showed against the Jags in the division to rally and play hard enough to stay within the number against the Bengals team that at least has an elite quarterback and elite wide receiver still trying and playing hard down the stretch? So think about this number for a bit. The Bengals were faded on the road at the Cowboys. 5.5 and 5s were taken out. It got down to basically an expensive 4. We're at a similar price point on the road on a short week against the team in the Tennessee Titans, where the question is, how are you rating them relative to the Cowboys with Cooper Rush at quarterback? And that's a question that I don't have an answer that is different enough from this number to be betting it either way. So that's really the full extent and handicap that I have here. But certainly the revenge game and the old coach going up against his prior team is one to look at. And you would think that if there is a spot the Titans get up for, this is it. I just don't know how much you can trust it. If you're enjoying the show so far and you've enjoyed the shows and the daily podcast and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, I see a lot of folks commenting that are not subscribed. There's a red button when you are subscribed. I don't see it. So if you are watching, there's nearly 300 of you right now. Subscribe button is down below. It's free to hit the subscribe button. It supports the channel. I'm trying to get it to 11,000 by the end of the season. We're up about 4,000 subs already this season, so trying to push it up a little bit further. If you do have a second right now to hit subscribe, would love it. If you're already subscribed, just take a second and hit the thumbs up button. Even if you're listening at work, you're typing on the screen on the side, you got the phone upside down, listen to the AirPods, take a second, put the email down, flip it around, hit the thumbs up. Would appreciate it very much if you're enjoying it so far. See if we can get one of these to 10,000 for a week. That would be pretty cool if we can do that. Been to 9.9K. Haven't quite broken through the 10 yet. We'll see if we can do that this week with your help. Next game up, Baltimore Ravens -15, total 43 on the road at the New York Giants. Take a sip of coffee, and we got subjectivity to the maximum to talk about in this one. Lamar Jackson's mom called out Lamar Jackson this week. They want him, she does, to run the football more. And she was critical of him because in the game against the Eagles, she felt like there were more running lanes available for Lamar to take advantage of. We're going to talk about some interesting prop angles as we go through the show. The mom call-out / squeaky wheel narrative is a new one for me. It's the first time I've seen it. So I say this is in a jokingly way. I do think it matters. And I do think we are going to see Lamar really start to use his legs down the stretch. Now, it's not because Felicia Jones, his mother, is calling him out. Partially, it's because the Ravens are going to shift the offense to allow it to happen more. The question is, as I go through this, needless to say, I won't be betting the side or the total, but I'm certainly intrigued by Lamar props this week. The question is, will he need to do it enough against the Giants as a 15-point favorite? I think that that's the fair question. So for the Ravens specifically, we have seen their offense change the last season and a half. It started last year in the London game against the Tennessee Titans. If you guys remember that, the Ravens lived in the red zone all game. And they relied on Lamar to run the football and try to get into the end zone, and he was stopped several times. After the game, Harbaugh went after Monken and the offensive staff and said, this cannot be the answer for the Ravens offense. We cannot get into the red zone and just rely on Lamar to do everything. If you go to ESPN and you pull up the Lamar Jackson game log and you look at last season, touchdowns were stacked, got to the London game, there was nothing, and then it got to the Houston game in the playoffs, and it switched. In the offseason, Todd Monken did a podcast for an Arkansas Razorbacks football fan site that had like 300 total viewers on the video. And Todd Monken talked about how much shit he got into for making the offense last year too run dependent on Lamar Jackson in the red zone. Part of the reason that he was so excited about Derrick Henry coming over was because Henry this year in the red zone was going to be the answer for the Ravens running the football. So far this season, we have seen the run rate for Lamar fall off of a cliff. We have seen the sack rate for Lamar spike, and he's just been running way less than he ever has over the course of his career. This has all been by design. Here's the problem. Not only is his mom calling him out, but we are starting to see Derrick Henry fall off just a little bit. This is kind of the problem and some of the reason why a lot of his preseason prop prices were lower. And that was because it was a guy who's 30 and he's aging and he's getting a ton of touches. And not only can defenses kind of sit in on that, but as the season progresses, how effective was he going to be as time went on? And we've seen his explosive run rate really dip the last couple of weeks. And that mesh point with Lamar being less of a threat as a runner has not been as effective. And I think that that has gone a long way into reducing the explosiveness of Derrick Henry. So with all of that said, what I believe is going to happen is the Ravens are going to, out of the bye, adjust their offense. They're going to allow Lamar to return to being more of a runner. And we are going to see down the stretch in games that really start to matter for the Ravens, and especially into the playoffs, Lamar Jackson start to run the football a ton and get back to some of those higher run rates that we have seen from him in the past. That's going to be starting to change. So I don't have a play on the side. I do not have a play on the total. I believe Lamar is going to be running a ton. I'm curious to see what the prop price is, and anything that comes from this, I will update in the pinned comment down below in the video as the week goes on in the next couple of days. WAGZ says, I don't see Lamar risking injury before playoffs in a game that they should walk against the Giants. And so this is a good point, right? Does it have to happen this week specifically? The answer is probably no. Next week against against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Saturday night, it's probably a game where it happens. I'm just putting it out there as something to keep in mind, as something to look at. Certainly going to continue to happen. So that is something that I would think about as well. Mario Met says, I think the early times might be hurting subscriptions. Look, there's certainly truth to that, as the podcast goes up at 2:15 a.m. Pacific every time. If you're watching it afterwards, you can still subscribe. You don't just have to be subscribing live. So if you are following anything, you can get to it. John Lim says, good AM from the Philippines. It is 1:30 a.m. right now. Dedication. John, thank you for joining in and watching. Glad to know. Rob, they're going to get a Campbell's Chunky Soup commercial. Was it McNabb that had one with his mom? Was that who it was back in the day? I feel like McNabb was always the Campbell's Chunky guy. So that's a great comment in the chat right now. Birdie says he's not seen the number. I'm seeing some 43.5s being chucked into the chat too. Bryce Miller, pumped about the graphics. I'm pumped about Bryce Miller back for another show. Top commenter on the YouTube channel, number 2. behind Brady. So there was a battle going on for top commenter on YouTube videos. KC -4 with a total of 45 on the road at the Cleveland Browns. This is a game that has come down. 5.5s and 5s taken out for Kansas City down to 4. I don't have a play on the side. I do not have a play on the total. I'll give some thoughts about Kansas City as the Sunday night game wasn't overly addressed, just to keep everybody up to date with what's going on with them and my thoughts. So couple things to watch for with injuries specifically. And this is more so focused on the defensive backfield. Since the Chiefs lost Jalen Watson earlier in the season and put him on IR, they have really struggled with the depth cornerback pieces on their team. This is a defense that looks nothing like the defense last year, which got them to and ultimately won the Super Bowl. It is a big step down. Their wide receivers finding way more space than they have and being able to separate from these corners at a much higher rate. When you look at the season as a whole for Kansas City, they're 17th in EPA per play allowed. In drop back EPA per play allowed, they have dropped all the way down to 21st. And if you filter for post injuries to some of these guys in the defensive backfield, you see those numbers fall off even more, especially after the Watson injury, who is so key. And so they have gone out and tried to address this problem by signing Steven Nelson. I don't know if that is going to be a fix, but the Kansas City Chiefs right now have a problem in the secondary, which is a tough thing to believe after how good they looked last season, pardon me. Last week to me against the Chargers, where there was no Ladd McConkey, they lost Will Dissly, and they didn't have an answer for Stone Smart. They didn't have an answer for Palmer a couple times, and there were some big plays just missed. You're seeing how teams can pick on Connor in coverage and just go right at him. You're seeing how some of these other corners are far less effective than what they've had in past seasons. Where this becomes a concern is when the coverage is not holding up for that extra half a second or second, the pass rush becomes a lot less effective too. And so not only are teams having more success throwing the football, but the pressure that Kansas City is throwing at other teams is not nearly as effective as it has been. So it's like a ripple effect through the entire defense. I don't know if there are answers here that can fix this down the stretch. Last year at this time, the issue with the Chiefs was Mahomes in the offense just isn't clicking. To me, this year with the defense, it's a personnel issue. I don't know if they sort this out. I don't know if they fix this. And I think it's a problem down the stretch. And I think it really starts to devalue what the Chiefs are and what their ceiling can be, especially when it's required gambling for them to try get off of the field, bringing extra guys. And these defensive backs are just so vulnerable in coverage right now. We have to see if Nelson can potentially make a difference. But, man, that is a stretch leaning on someone like that. And so where I'm going with this is we're starting to see the market bet against the Chiefs, laying numbers like this. Last week was an exception because the injury news was so different. I think there's a conversation, or at least a mindset, that this is happening because of the point differential, because of the inability to cover over the last 2 months. I think it's more to do with the defense that continues to struggle and the lack of trust that anybody has in the Chiefs holding a lead, more so than it is a lack of trust that the Chiefs offense can figure things out and get outside the number to cover. The Cleveland Browns with Jameis Winston are an incredibly difficult team to back. The variance that he brings is cute on social media, and everybody likes to make jokes about him and how lovable he is. Like, I get it. He's a great guy. He's funny. I love the videos. You want to talk about a team that is hard to back and hard to trust. I'm putting Cleveland at the top of the list with Jameis Winston at quarterback. It's a bit of an asset that he finds explosive plays downfield, but these turnovers are so detrimental. And the only reason that they're it's like, oh, it's just Jameis being Jameis. If this is any other quarterback, he's quarterback fade number one in the league. I mean, everybody would want to bet against him, but there's like this lovable component that disguises how detrimental some of these plays are to this offense. and how tough it makes to trust them as well. It's two teams that are very tough to trust at the moment. And there's just bigger issues at hand with this Chiefs secondary that gives me a bit of worry in this game. I wonder what they're going to do down the stretch to try to figure this out. And so I'm seeing it in the chat. Kansas City hasn't covered a game the last 8, I think. I don't know what to make of that, honestly, because you can go back a little bit further and you're seeing a lot of high rates of covering point spreads the last season or two. So, man, I don't know. Birdie says 17-17-30, 14-24-20. Are we sure the Chiefs D is struggling? Seems like a narrative to fill space. Well, they played Justin Herbert with no wide receivers and no skill players. They played Aiden O'Connell with Brock Bowers. They played Bryce Young and the Panthers. They played Josh Allen and the Bills, who did whatever they wanted on offense to them. They played Drew Lock and the Broncos on the road in Arrowhead. And then that game prior for the 20 would have been, I don't even know who the 20-point performance came from. I don't see that on the list. But the other game was against the Buccaneers with Baker Mayfield without his two best weapons, and they moved it comfortably. So the one game in that sample, Birdie, that they stepped up and faced a good offense, they gave up 30 and didn't have answers. So you think about that list of quarterbacks and the list of injuries to skill position players and the other issues. I mean, that is a very, very, very weak schedule of opposing skill players and opposing quarterbacks to an extent in spots without those skill guys. So I don't think it's a narrative to fill space. I think visually, it's an issue on field when you're watching the games. So I don't think it's a stretch. I don't think it's a narrative to fill space. And I think visually you can see the issues that they're having just watching highlights. So that's what I would say. Dallas on the road at the Carolina Panthers. Panthers 2.5, total 42.5. No play for me, side or total. If you're putting me on the spot, I could really only look at Carolina in this game. The Cowboys, the last 2 games at home, I've really been bought in. There's been a pretty big emphasis to break the streak on Thanksgiving. There was an effort shown that was very strong against the Bengals team that was out of it. I start to wonder for the Cowboys how much of the game against the Giants was the Cowboys improving and looking better versus how much of that was the Giants being the Giants with Drew Lock effectively quitting on the season that may have made the Cowboys look a lot better than they are. I think that's a fair comment and a fair thing to look at on Monday night. Again, they probably should have got the win based on how that game played out. Tough to lose on a punt block under 2 minutes, and that's exactly what happened to them. But now they go away from home. They go on the road to play a Panthers team that is obviously bought in, still fighting, and looking much better week over week, especially on offense. The Dallas Cowboys lose Overshown to just a gruesome injury that is going to keep him up for next year. And the emotion that was shown in press conferences post-game about guys reacting to that injury and the importance that he had to this defense was shocking to me. Obviously a very talented player, but that is a Cowboys defense that is now without a key guy. And you just have to look at the pressers to see how much he matters. And so is this turning into a bit of a letdown on a short week going into Carolina? The way that the game is being bet, the way that the game is being priced, certainly would suggest so. And you think about the Panthers, good performances against the Chiefs, a decent-ish performance against the Philadelphia Eagles. They've been competitive. Dallas Cowboys in these last 2 games, how much noise is there in the Bengals performance? How much noise is there in the Giants performance? And so I think the price is justified to be where it is for the Panthers. Certainly not a team you usually see favored over the last couple seasons, but that stands out to me. And if you put me on the spot, that's the way that I would go, but nothing for me in this game, side nor total. Pittsburgh on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles 5-point favorites, total 42 in this game. Big question for me is, what does the Eagles' ground game look like against an above-average rushing defense? The Pittsburgh Steelers, much better than above average. From an EPA per play perspective this season, they're 5th. When it comes to defending the run specifically, they are 10th. This is the toughest opposing run defense the Philadelphia Eagles have faced since the Baltimore Ravens. It is just the second defense all season that the Philadelphia Eagles have faced that ranks above average in run defense. And so this is the Eagles offense stepping up in class. And I highlight the run defense specifically because the Eagles have been front runners all season. They have relied on the run game to build a lead. They have relied on the run game to win out games, and that's been their MO. And we are seeing that kind of get to a boiling point this week where both Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown have been calling out the passing game, and there has been friendly fire all over the place from Eagles players, both past and present, for calling out the ineffectiveness of the passing game and Jalen Hurts so far this season. And it's interesting because Jalen Hurts was a little bit defensive when he was confronted with some of the comments. And so, again, it's another time this season where the Eagles have a bit of locker room turmoil going on. And in this matchup, it's not an ideal opponent to try get things right on offense when you're thinking about facing a Steelers defense. Couple things to kind of think about here as we look at this. Will the Eagles' run offense be as effective as it has been in weeks past? I believe the answer is no. I think it's going to be a lot harder to run on the Steelers defense than teams that they have faced in past weeks. So we're going to see the run defense look worse. What becomes interesting is with this very obvious squeaky wheel narrative that exists for A.J. Brown, we're hearing Kellen Moore wanting to get the passing game involved more in the game early. He's talking about ways this week so far to get A.J. Brown in the passing game more active earlier in games. When you start to think about this, right, at first level, if the Eagles' run offense is stepping up in class in a big way and is going to step back and the offense could struggle, that might mentally get you to a spot where you're saying, hey, Pittsburgh +5 sounds pretty good. But what if this squeaky wheel narrative and the back and forth and the call out of the passing game actually flips the Eagles into more of an effective team? And what I mean by that is hearing Kellen Moore say, I want to get the passing game involved more early. I want to find ways to get A.J. Brown involved more early in games might be a very big positive for Philadelphia because through 14 weeks, the Philadelphia Eagles have covered the first quarter point spread just 2 times. From an EPA per play perspective on offense in the first quarter, the Philadelphia Eagles are second worst for offensive production. So they are the second worst team in offensive production, the worst team in first quarter performance relative to the point spread. And a lot of that, in my opinion, has been from just really bad play calling and really bad early game play scripting. And so if we're thinking about the Eagles' run game struggling relative to what they have been this year against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's a negative, but all of this talk and Kellen Moore changing things up early in games, potentially, if you believe it, maybe that makes the Eagles a much better first quarter team. All of these negative starts to games and these slow starts maybe go away. And that in turn frees up the run game later in the game, setting them up in a better spot to move the football. Interesting way to kind of look at it. I think there's a lot of back and forth in this game because of that and not knowing how to gauge the Eagles and not knowing how to gauge what you're potentially getting from them from an offensive output. So we've seen this go from 5.5 to 4 back to 5. It's been a back and forth game all week. Not really one that I want to take a stance on. It certainly becomes quite interesting if you think about what can change. Now, certainly A.J. Brown props going to be very popular this week. The last time he had a call out in a squeaky wheel spot like this resulted in him going 6 consecutive games for 125 yards or more. That first game after, he was involved a ton. I think that that's relatively well known, and we're going to see a very high prop price for him relative to past closers, but certainly could be a game where he's featured a ton in this one. Buffalo Bills on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions 2.5-point favorites, total 54.5. Give me the Buffalo Bills plus 2.5 in this game. Took them on the Super Bowl futures market 6-1 Sunday night. I think they cover. I think they win outright. And I think is the first game we see the Lions stumble in the last few months. So a lot of things to talk about in this game specifically. The first is just last week and what we saw from the Bills on the road at the Rams. I think it's fair to say that that was a bit of an exhale spot. They clinch the AFC East against San Francisco in the snow on Sunday night, go across the country to play LA. It's a slow start. I think it's fair to say that there was a bit of an exhale. And I think that that was reflected by not rushing back Coleman in practice, keeping him in the non-contact jersey, not rushing back Kincaid, despite him being reported to be in position to return. The Bills, to me, approached that game a little bit cautiously. And we talked about the Rams at the top of the show and what that looked like and how great of a game that was for Stafford. I don't think that's a full indictment of the Buffalo Bills defense, which we'll talk about in a second. I think that was the Bills getting Stafford and Kupp and Nakua and McVay and again, a top 10 performance of the last 25 years from an offensive output standpoint. That was just walking into that. And still, without their two best weapons in that spot where they started slow, kind of exhaling, they still hang 42 points on the board. The level and the ceiling that this Bills offense can touch when they're playing indoors and not outdoors in the elements is absurdly high. And I mean, to do what they did last week without their best guys on the field is incredibly impressive. And they get another chance to do it again this week against the Lions defense. This is going to be a massive Josh Allen game, both through the air, but especially on the ground. Aaron Glenn and his defense in his entire tenure with the Detroit Lions has struggled immensely at defending mobile quarterbacks. And the thing is, this season, the Detroit Lions, think about the quarterbacks that they have faced the last couple of weeks. They faced the Green Bay Packers, Jordan Love, not the most mobile, but he was willing to run. Caleb Williams, again, not that true mobile quarterback. He was willing to run at times. They faced the Colts with a Anthony Richardson-led offense, 10 carries for 61 yards. He was a willing runner. But prior to that, Jags, Texans, Packers, Titans, Vikings, Cowboys, Seahawks, they just haven't faced a mobile QB threat like they're going to see with Josh Allen in this game. The other positive thing is we really see Josh Allen use his legs when it is a high leverage game. And with the Chiefs winning on Sunday night, the Bills need to keep winning to keep a chance at the number one seed, but they also have to keep winning to keep distance from Pittsburgh, who is right on their heels in the playoff picture as well. So I think this is a game where Kincaid returns. I think there's an outside chance that Coleman returns. It is a massive Josh Allen game. And he is also going to be facing man coverage from the Detroit Lions, where to this point this season, he has just destroyed man coverage. And he's really struggled against zone coverage, where last week he proved that wrong. So that was even more impressive to me in that performance. And I'm looking at this Bills offense just being in an absolute explosion spot again for a second week in a row. And so to me, this change in spot is just a home run handicapping spot. Now, I'm going to keep things well-rounded. I'm going to be honest with things. There is a negative here for the Buffalo Bills. What we are seeing be the biggest weakness of this Bills team is their defense, specifically defending the run. Every time this season that the Bills have gone up against a bigger, more physical offensive line, the defense has struggled. And they've struggled specifically against the run game, because what has to happen is an undersized defensive front in the Buffalo Bills has to have extra guys commit to stopping the run game. And it typically requires them resorting to run blitzes, which makes them a little bit vulnerable in coverage. And some of the big plays against the Rams were just the Bills guessing wrong against the run and being just a little bit exposed in coverage. Some amazing plays, but we saw that weakness show. What we've also seen the Bills struggle a little bit against this season too is playing offenses that operate from condensed formations, because it really kind of tightens things up for the Bills defensively, and that's a bit of a vulnerable state for them to be in. And so I think about the Niners who were moving it a little bit in the snow. I think about the Dolphins who were able to move it. Those are teams that operate a lot from condensed formations. Here's a Lions team that certainly has a very physical offensive line, a very physical ground game, and operates from a lot of condensed formations as well. If this is a Lions game again, where they get out like they have the last couple of weeks, they've taken the ball and they push down the field to score. If it's an early Lions lead, there is a potential that the Bills defense can struggle again stopping the run for the Lions. I think the difference in this game versus what we saw last week is the level of play and that ceiling that you can get from Goff and these wide receivers and the routes that they can run is not as high as what you can get from Stafford and those receivers at their highest level. I also don't view these Lions wide receivers being as good of blockers as what the Rams have with their wide receivers in those condensed formations. So there's a chance here that the Bills get away with it a little bit. It still is a big weakness. It still makes them vulnerable. And if this is a game where we see the Bills struggle defensively and the Lions win, that is how the Lions are going to win this game. And it's going to be one of the weaknesses we see of the Bills down the stretch. So to me, I like the Bills here. I like the points. I think they win outright. This is a game where I'm looking for the Bills just to have an explosion on offense. And to me, the Lions redlining a little bit with how they've been playing. But there's both sides to this to watch when it comes to Sunday. This is going to be an awesome game to watch. And that's how I'm looking at it. Duncan says, I think Adam would cheer for North Korea over the Lions. I find these comments interesting because I do not have an alliance to North Korea, but the way I talk about teams like sticks with some people in the comments more than others. I bet the Lions last week against the Green Bay Packers, and I bet them against the Jacksonville Jags a few weeks ago. Like, I've been playing on the Lions a lot this year. So, I mean, yeah, Sean says he literally said, get to the Lions last week. So I find it interesting because there was another comment that was saying, you're always betting the Chiefs and you're always betting the Jets. And I'm always intrigued to know what people hear from the shows and the podcast and what they take away. And I said it on Monday, like, everybody listens for a different reason, which is something that I love because everybody's taking away different things, whether they're looking for picks, they're looking for things they might have missed, news, updates, anything like that. And so I find those comments very interesting as they come in. But that was one that I don't necessarily agree with, not because I'm not cheering for North Korea, but also because I've been playing on the Lions quite a bit this season. Preston says, do you like the Bills straight up? I do. Indianapolis +4 on the road at the Denver Broncos. Indianapolis +4 is pick number 3 for the show for me so far. Wanted to make sure it was 3 and not 4. We talked about Washington and how that's in between. Give me the Colts here out of the bye, going on the road to take on the Denver Broncos. And so this is a price for the Denver Broncos that we have seen them at home the last couple of weeks close very close to. And I'm not ready to put the Colts in the same range or really anywhere close to the Raiders or the Browns the last couple of weeks. And even with the Indianapolis Colts, like I'm looking at ratings and my personal numbers. I have them slightly better than the Atlanta Falcons. And the Atlanta Falcons on the road in Denver, the Broncos closed -2. And so this is now the Colts +4. I don't agree with this price. I think that it should be shorter, and I do think we see this number get bet in as the week goes on and close slightly lower than +4. Could be wrong with that, but I'm still surprised to see this lingering at +4. The Colts out of the bye are approaching things very simply with 2 mandates coming from Shane Steichen. Number 1, find more explosive plays in the pass game. We talked about it at the top of the show. The league is changing. Teams are changing. It's the time of year where you see things open up. Indianapolis is going to throw the football more than expected in this game. Josh Downs has returned to practice this morning. There's a good chance that he is going to be playing in this game. And the Denver Broncos will very likely be without Moss, their cornerback number 2, who's performed very well this season. There is going to be an advantage for the Colts in the passing game to try to exploit that I think is going to make this offense more explosive than it is. Defensively, they've been decent at limiting some of these big chunk plays, but what they've been quietly good at, which I think matters a lot in this game, is up front, they rank above average in pressure rate, and they're doing it rushing primarily 4 guys. This defense has quietly, since getting healthy around the midway point in the season, been very effective at getting into the pocket and disrupting opposing offenses, and they're doing it without overcommitting. And so this is going to be a very difficult test for Bo Nix to navigate, even though the Broncos O-line has set him up in very good spots, and they're playing with a ton of confidence. Like, I get it. They're bought in. I think we are going to see him really kind of struggle to navigate these defensive looks that the Colts are throwing at him, and it is going to be a bigger test. That scramble ability against these cover 3 looks is not going to be as effective. I don't see the run game being as effective. And if this Colts defensive line can win up front with 4 like they have so often this season, I think they're going to be able to just throw looks at Nix that he hasn't seen in recent weeks, especially against a team like the Browns or especially a team like the Raiders where he's looked really good. There's also an element here where I just think about who the Broncos have been playing the last couple of weeks and some of the issues with these teams that is perhaps making them look a little bit better than they actually are, getting to now a new high in their overall season rating. And so for me here, the Colts getting 4 is a good price for me to take in this game. Jets Pete saying, do you really want to back Richardson on the road against this pass defense? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Tampa Bay on the road at the LA Chargers. Nothing here for me on the side nor the total. Chargers injuries, certainly something to keep an eye on with McConkey, with Disley, seeing what their status is going to be. I would think that McConkey is going to be good to go for this game. Is he going to be close to 100%? We'll see. I think that those injuries matter a little bit more because the Bucs will be without Antoine Winfield for the next couple of weeks. He's one of the better safeties in the NFL. You take him out of this defense, there's certainly ways to exploit them through the air, but Herbert is going to need those guys healthy in order to do so. Against this defense for the Chargers, I think it's a bit of a difficult matchup for the Buccaneers, but at this price point, I think it's priced fair. I think the total, arguably a touch high, perhaps, with some of those guys banged up and the way that we've seen the Chargers operate a little bit, but no opinion here for me, side nor total. Same thing exists in this game as well. New England on the road at Arizona. I have no take on the side nor the total in this game. This has been a ton of back and forth all week that we have seen. As high as 6, as low as 4.5. We're sitting at 5.5. A battle back and forth. That's true for 7 or 8 games on the board. I believe there was a fake on the total early week that brought this up. It was around 44 at open, got bet down, and then very quickly was bet back up. And we've seen nearly a 3-point move on this total since this time to the over. So I think there was a little bit of manipulation, a little bit of faking going on in the very early window of the market to push this total up. You think about the Pats and how much of an over team they have been with Drake May and just how much different they profile than what they have at the start of the year, and numbers still catching up to that. But also in this matchup, Arizona, little bit like certainly in full desperation mode. If there's anything left, we're going to see their pass rate spike a little bit relative to what it's been at. So that's probably a positive for the over. So like I can see where that gets to and what we're looking at from an over perspective, but at 46 is not a number that I would play. Sunday Night Football. Gerard, if you're watching, shield your eyes. Green Bay Packers minus 2.5 with a total of 46 on the road at Seattle. Give me the Packers minus 2.5, minus 120. This was one that we released as well. I like the Green Bay Packers in this spot to get the win and to get the cover. Couple things at play here. First of all, these NFC North teams at the top, Green Bay, Minnesota, Detroit, you get them outside of the NFC North, and they have been dominant. And they're 28-3 outside of playing each other this season. And when they step out of the division to play teams that are not among the elite in the NFL. I mean, it has looked like two teams from two different leagues playing two different sports at times. And so this certainly is one of those games for the Green Bay Packers where they're stepping out of the division, not to play the Philadelphia Eagles, not to play some of the elite teams in the NFL, but to play the Seahawks, a very good team, but a team that is not in that class. And so I think there is an element of that is not being fully priced into this number. The second thing that I'm thinking at that goes towards that is this is a Seahawks team that out of the bye has looked very good, and the defense has looked much improved, and the Mike McDonald coaching hire is being fully validated. I mean, this defense is bought in. They're playing extremely hard. They're playing for their coach, and the changes are making a big difference. They've been much better against the run, against the pass. They've had a lot of success too. It's a dramatic improvement the last 4 games out of the bye. But as I think about the Green Bay Packers and some of the division numbers in games that might be skewing what their rating should be, I think similarly about the Seattle Seahawks the last couple of weeks. Coming out of the bye, they have played the Arizona Cardinals twice and won both of those games. They have played the New York Jets, a game which they were a tipped interception pick 6 late second quarter from being down 28-7 and certainly losing that game. And then they played the San Francisco 49ers, in which they finished with 20 points in a game where a Niners team was riddled with injuries, and the Seahawks needed a last-second Geno Smith scrambled touchdown to escape with a victory. As much as the Seahawks have improved and looked great the last couple of weeks, I'm not fully buying into this jump that they're getting in the ratings because of who they have played and how some of these games have gone. I think it's been impressive. I like it. I like the direction, but this Packers team is a different level of challenge and a different caliber of opponent. And I think stepping up here for Seattle is going to be a bit of a shock to this improvement and to this trajectory that they are on. The run defense has been very good the last couple of weeks. The Green Bay Packers are running the football at a different level. And if this is a game where Green Bay can get the ground game going early, even amid the defensive improvement for Seattle, a big vulnerability that they have had is defending play action. And Green Bay in play action can be very effective with this offense and with this scheme. So to me, this is a game where the Green Bay Packers going into Seattle, get the win, get the cover. And I'll go like, I hate to go gut feel, and I hate to go like, this is what I'm feeling watching these games. I mean, I have watched every Seahawks snap start to finish. Like, I love watching these games for Seattle. I love watching this team. I love following this team. They're the local team for me up here in the Pacific Northwest. This season has been a ton of fun to follow them from a distance. I feel that there is an element of overperforming, and I said it with the Lions as well, like redlining to an extent that we are getting with the Seahawks team the last couple of weeks, where just everything's clicking. They're getting bounces. Things are going their way. The defense is bought in. They're playing at a very high level. Like, how sustainable is this on a weekly basis? And how often, even against Arizona, like immediately down 7-0, they're faded in the market on game day at the biggest limits. I'm watching a game and I'm like, this is it for Seattle. 2 picks back-to-back, setting them up for touchdowns. Game flips. It's over. Seattle wins and runs away with it. That Jets game, again, like trailing late. There's the pick 6. Should have been over. All of a sudden, Seattle's back in the game. Like, it's crazy how some of these are happening. In the first game against Arizona, tight game back and forth, 4th and 2, little flip pass, boom, taken back the other way for 6, pick 6. Like, everything is falling their way. And the last thing I'd say on this is, like, I start to have that feel not only from watching it, but I'm watching the market. Obviously, last week with Detroit doing the show on Wednesday morning, disadvantageous as the Lions closed 3, but Packers backed heavily in the betting market last week, pregame, just hammered in the betting market. And I would say in play as well, watching that game against the Lions, the way that the market was shaded towards Green Bay for the whole game, to me, was very telling about what the betting market thinks about the Green Bay Packers. And then at the second half mark as well, it was a 2-point move at the biggest limits, at the biggest books at halftime. in favor of the Packers. And so there was an element to that too, where we're seeing the Seahawks faded in market. We're seeing the Packers backed heavily recently, and this number isn't quite reflecting that. And so a lot there I just threw at you. It's just kind of how I feel about the game and what I look at. And that to me is a game where the Packers win and cover here on the road. Gerard is upset. Boo with several O's. Duncan says Adam would cheer for Russia over the Seattle Seahawks. It's like again, like last week, I was talking about how I was very tempted to back the Seahawks all week. So I don't know. Randy is asking if I play any teasers. Teasers, when they're available, they're amazing, Randy. The problem is that it's becoming really difficult to find books that have them at better than minus 120. I don't have a lot of interest in playing teasers at like 130 and 140. They tend to be bad bets, and that becomes problematic because that's just you're not getting a price that is worth what you were teasing through. So it really, really depends on the price that you're getting. Scott, this is a great question. Is weather still a factor in the Seattle game? This has been one of the more, I would say, unique weather games that we have seen all season. In what we're looking at, I'm pulling up the Kevin Roth weather forecast to see his final take on it. He posts Wednesday, and it's always very great. There was a 30-mile-per-hour difference between weather models yesterday on this game, and there was under money coming into the market, I think, because of that. AccuWeather, as a weather model, always tends to be pretty erratic with their wind forecast, and that was the model that was standing out as the most different. They had gusts up to 45 miles per hour forecasted for this game. The government weather model had it significantly less, like almost at 0. And then the Euro model had it at like 7. And so there was just a huge variance in the weather models for this game. This morning, everything has tightened up quite a bit, and the wind has dropped off. I see Roth. He does not have any wind forecasted for this game. The wind is in a window that is earlier in the day. It's a very good reminder for everybody who's watching this to look at multiple weather models and multiple weather sources as you're betting weather games down the stretch. We're certainly going to have some of them in the next 4 weeks and into the playoffs. If you are looking at multiple models, you're going to get a much better picture than if you're just searching it on Google or going to your favorite weather site. Look at multiple sites. Go to windy.com for some wind forecasts where you can compare multiple ones. Weather's going to be an edge that you can find very early in weeks as the rest of the weeks go on in December. Just keep that in mind when you're looking at it. Vincent says, offshores I found that have 6-point teasers at minus 110. Jazz, Bet Phoenix, and you wager. I didn't even know Bet Phoenix was still around, to be honest. So that's a good call out from you. We're also seeing Gary say DK has minus 120 on 6-pointers. Scott saying you do a tremendous job with Mitch and Paulie on VSiN. I appreciate that very much, Scott. I've loved doing that one for a number of years. So I'm glad you're watching that and enjoying it as well. Last 2 games on the board. I have very little to say about either of them. Chicago on the road at Minnesota, minus 7 even money. Total 43.5. So Minnesota has closed the last couple of weeks at a very similar price point at home against very, I would call it, similarly rated opponents. Last week, they closed 6 at home against Atlanta. Against Arizona, they closed minus 3.5. Narrowly escaped against Arizona. Ultimately ended up blowing out the Falcons by 3 scores. I look at this game at 7. And I think about the first meeting between these two teams where Minnesota was comfortably ahead, and it was Chicago scoring late, plus the onside kick to force overtime. And that game got really messy late. I'm checking what that closed, as I forgot it off the top of my mind. It was November 24th, just before Thanksgiving. That game closed at home for Chicago, Vikings a 3-point favorite. So you have the venue flip plus home field advantage. You have the recent closers. You get to Minnesota minus 7. I can't necessarily disagree with that, but at the price I cannot bet Minnesota. And I wish I had any level of confidence in Thomas Brown as a head coach of the Chicago Bears to get any level of effort out of his team, because I think if you're putting me on the spot to make an argument either way at 7, there's probably a slightly more compelling case to be made for backing the Bears at this point than there is the Vikings. But I saw last week interim head coach that is seriously not qualified to be a head coach in the NFL. I saw a team that should have been fully bought in and rejuvenated off of a reset be able to do nothing and completely no-show in the first half at a no-show rate that is almost higher than anything I can think of off the top of my head. I have no idea what you're getting from the Bears the final 4 games down the stretch. The level of quit here is certainly very evident. And so I cannot play this game. Laying this number with Minnesota becomes very tough to justify. Atlanta -4 with a total of 44 on the road at Las Vegas. I would expect this to be a Desmond Ridder game for the Las Vegas Raiders. The way that Antonio Pierce spoke about the injury to O'Connell early in the week after the game, nothing about that sounded like Aiden O'Connell was going to be good to go. And now I see Twitter doctors saying that he should be able to play through the bone bruise. And the fact he avoided a major injury is a positive. Man, I have a hard time believing that. I really do, based on how Pierce was presenting it and what he was saying. I don't have any info confirming that. That's just my sense in watching the pressers and reading the initial reports. But again, I could be wrong. If this is Ridder, Atlanta should close -5. I couldn't see Ridder and O'Connell being priced at the same mark. This was 3.5 on the look ahead. Atlanta was certainly deserving of better than a 42-21 box score blowout against the Minnesota Vikings, as they performed much better than that final score would indicate. And so I think that bumps the price up a little bit. So we're talking about a half-point adjustment here. I don't think Ridder potentially starting is being priced in here. So I think it gets to 4.5 or 5 if Ridder is announced as the starter officially. Can you lay that number with Atlanta against the Raiders pass rush that has been good? And we've certainly seen Kirk Cousins struggle in the pocket when he has been pressured. I think it's a fair number, and I think it's a fair total. I don't have a lot to say. I know another pro who bet Atlanta -4 earlier in the week, did so pretty quietly. There was a little bit of movement off of it, but nothing substantial. Could maybe see the over taking a little bit of money down the stretch, but I just don't have a lot to say there. Joe English brings up a good point. I wonder if Bauer's over props are worth a play. If they want him to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, Turner should feature him on Monday Night Football. Falcons get a little bit of QB pressure too. You would expect that to be a better case, Joe, if it does turn into an O'Connell start, I would think, than Ridder. But certainly would be target number 1 for Ridder if he does start. It's just hard to trust Desmond Ridder in any game when you're having an over on any props. I think back to some of those Falcons games last year, and that was tough. Paul Enzo says it's a Desmond Ridder revenge game. Paul, your comments are some of my favorite every week with the revenge games, but this is obviously a pretty obvious one too. So Birdie says the whole world in capitals is on the Falcons. I have not seen one person say, hey, let's take the Raiders. And this line is really not moving based off the sentiment I am seeing content-wise. Interesting note there as well. Final couple questions down the stretch. David Rosansky is asking, will we see any Christmas decorations for the remainder of December shows? I think that's a fair question. We'll get something going here in the next couple of days and get stuff set up for we got a number of streams to go. I'm not sure what we'll do Christmas week. I'll keep everybody updated with that. But yes, we will dress things up a little bit. Mario is asking, do you play SGPs? Personally, I love a good SGP. I think they're a ton of fun. I think you can find some pretty good prices still, even with books adjusting and tightening things up a little bit. I love a good SGP myself. Next year, I think content-wise, there'll be some changes next year into how things are presented, condensed a little bit, and there might be a little bit more willingness and openness of sharing some things throughout the week at certain times and not having it condensed into certain windows. And maybe we'll get into some of them Or maybe we'll look at some for playoff games as well, too. But I think next year there'll be a little bit more focus on that, Mario, for some things that come up. In general, as you're just asking, they're a very easy way to make a very bad bet at a very bad price. But I will say, between books, when you're going and comparing and seeing how the correlation models work at each, you can still find things that are not nearly priced correct, in my opinion. So that is, there's good and bad with SGPs, to put it lightly. Question from, where did the teaser question go? David Rosansky says, sorry if I missed it. Who would you pair with Washington in a teaser? It would be very taboo to put Buffalo in a teaser with a total of 54.5 points, but that is one that certainly stands out to me when you're getting them teased up with that offense and how good it looks and the guys returning. I would be, in many ways, willing to break the basic strategy mentality of that and pair it with the Bills. So that is probably going to receive more criticism than anything I have seen and said all year. But yeah, I would look at that for sure, David. You're giving me the Bills in a tease up above a touchdown. It's very, very difficult to say no. Hour 20 for a full game slate. Not bad. We might get to cutting a few games off in the next weeks or two as things really die down and just kind of focusing high level on 3 or 4 games that are kind of unbettable. And there might not be a whole lot to talk about as some of these teams kind of shift their mentality into next season, just to keep this closer to that hour mark. But if you've made it this far and you've not yet hit the subscribe button, again, guys, I'm pushing for 11,000. There's a lot of comments that I see come in on a daily basis. Not subscribed. I love comments coming in, but if you are commenting, you're hanging around the videos, you're following along, subscribe button is down below. It's free to subscribe. It's free to follow. You're not going to get peppered with anything crazy for emails, or you're not getting your data going anywhere. It's just to get notifications when videos go up, and it helps the channel. It boosts the video. If you're already subscribed, before you go, you want to hit the thumbs up. There's 330 of you on the stream right now. Would love to have you on there. Mario is still pumped about the Kendre Miller touchdown last week at plus 470. A couple other first quarter props did not go as well, Mario, but we'll see if there's some long shot touchdowns that I can put in there as well. Gerard says, another podcast in the books. Great stuff as usual. Thank you very much. Gerard, we're against each other on Sunday Night Football, but I hope you enjoy the week. I hope you enjoy the game. I hope everybody has a fantastic week 15, and we'll chat to you again bright and early tomorrow morning on the podcast feed.